A volatile escalation in the Western Hemisphere threatens to upend the fragile geopolitical balance of South America, as the government of Venezuela formally accuses the United States of orchestrating acts of war and terrorism within its borders. We are looking at a scenario where diplomatic friction has transitioned into allegations of kinetic strikes, with Caracas claiming to possess irrefutable proof that American intelligence agencies and military operatives are behind a series of bombings targeting sovereign soil. This is not merely a war of words. It involves the mobilization of troops, the activation of air defense systems, and a direct challenge to the security architecture of the Caribbean basin. As global energy markets watch with increasing anxiety, the question being asked in capitals around the world is whether this is political theater intended to consolidate power or the prelude to a disastrous armed conflict in a region sitting atop the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. To understand the severity of this moment, we must examine the specific details of the charges leveled by the Miraflores Palace in a series of urgent broadcasts across Venezuelan state media. High-ranking officials, including President Nicolas Maduro and Attorney General Tarek William Saab, have presented what they describe as a dismantled conspiracy of foreign origin. The Venezuelan government asserts that the Central Intelligence Agency and the Drug Enforcement Administration have collaborated with local opposition figures and foreign mercenaries to execute a campaign of terror. The accusations are granular and severe. Venezuelan authorities claim to have thwarted 5 separate conspiracies, one of which allegedly involved plans to bomb the headquarters of the 42nd Paratroop Brigade and other strategic military installations in the state of Táchira. Furthermore, recent explosions and failures at the Amoy and Cardón refining complexes, critical hubs for the nation as fuel supply, have been officially categorized by Caracas not as industrial accidents, but as targeted attacks using explosives and remote sabotage facilitated by U.S. technology. The Venezuelan Ministry of Defense has gone on the record stating that these operations were designed to assassinate the head of state and defense minister, Vladimir Padrino López, creating a power vacuum that would justify foreign intervention. In televised presentations, the Attorney General has displayed maps, confession videos, and recovered communications gear which he states prove the involvement of U.S. operatives based in Colombia and Guyana. The narrative emerging from Caracas is that Washington, having failed to achieve regime change through economic sanctions, has shifted tactics toward direct physical sabotage and asymmetric warfare intended to collapse the Venezuelan electric grid and incite civil unrest during a critical election year. The response from the United States has been swift and categorical. The State Department, the White House National Security Council, and the U.S. Embassy for Venezuela have all issued denials characterizing the accusations as completely baseless. U.S. officials state unequivocally that the United States is not engaged in any plot to overthrow the Venezuelan government or attack its infrastructure. The counter-narrative from Washington suggests that the Maduro administration is manufacturing external threats to justify a crackdown on domestic political opposition and to distract the populace from internal economic hardships. Independent energy experts and U.S. analysts have long attributed the recurring explosions at refineries and blackouts across the Venezuelan grid 2 years of chronic brain drain within the state oil company, PDVSA, and a lack of maintenance rather than foreign sabotage. However, the Venezuelan government insists that the timing of these incidents, coinciding with renewed political tensions, points to a coordinated external assault. This standoff does not exist in a vacuum. It is the latest and most dangerous chapter in a complex geopolitical saga involving the territorial dispute over the Essequibo region. The context here is critical. Last year, Venezuela held a referendum claiming sovereignty over 2/3 of neighboring Guyana, a territory rich in oil and minerals. In response to Venezuela's military buildup on the border, the United States strengthened its defense cooperation with Guyana. The U.S. Southern Command conducted flight operations and joint drills with the Guyana Defense Force, and high-level Pentagon officials have visited Georgetown. Venezuela has seized upon these maneuvers, interpreting the presence of U.S. military assets in Guyana, and the recent docking of the British patrol vessel HMS Trent as evidence of an encircling aggression. Caracas argues that the alleged bombings and sabotage plots are part of this broader military encirclement strategy. Led by the Pentagon, the timing of these accusations is inextricably linked to the collapse of the Barbados Agreement, signed in October 2023 between the Venezuelan government and the opposition. The deal was intended to pave the way for free and fair elections in exchange for U.S. sanctions relief. For a brief window, under general license, the U.S. Treasury allowed Venezuela to sell its oil and gas freely to the United States and other markets. However, following the Venezuelan Supreme Court's decision to uphold the ban on the leading opposition candidate, the United States moved to reimpose strict sanctions. Caracas has framed the return of these sanctions as an act of economic warfare, now allegedly paired with the physical warfare of sabotage. The breakdown of diplomacy has removed the incentives for de-escalation, leaving both sides in a posture of confrontation. The international reaction reflects the deep polarization of the current global order. The United Nations Secretary-General has expressed deep concern, calling for maximum restraint and urging both nations to avoid actions that could lead to a wider conflict. However, the diplomatic lines are drawn clearly. Allies of Venezuela, specifically the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China, have issued statements supporting Venezuela's right to defend its national sovereignty and condemning external interference. In contrast, the European Union and the Organization of American States have expressed skepticism regarding the coup and bombing allegations, focusing instead on the human rights situation and the integrity of the electoral process. Regional powers are caught in the middle. Brazil, under the leadership of President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, has traditionally maintained ties with Maduro, but has signaled growing impatience and concern over the border militarization, fearing that a security incident could destabilize the entire Amazon basin. Colombia, which shares a porous border with Venezuela, has offered to mediate, citing the disastrous humanitarian consequences a conflict would trigger. The financial and economic implications of these developments are immediate and significant. The global oil market is reacting to the reintroduction of risk premiums associated with Venezuelan supply. While Venezuela's production is a fraction of what it was 2 decades ago, it remains a significant source of heavy crude, which is prized by complex refineries in the U.S. Gulf Coast. The accusation of state-sponsored bombing creates a legal and security nightmare for Western energy companies. Corporations such as Chevron, Repsol, and Eni have been operating in Venezuela under specific U.S. licenses. If the Venezuelan government declares a state of emergency or formally designates the U.S. as a belligerent aggressor, the legal framework for these companies to operate could collapse. This would effectively halt the flow of Venezuelan oil to the West, tightening global supply at a time when tensions in the Middle East are already straining the market. Furthermore, the escalation impacts investor sentiment across emerging markets in Latin America. The prospect of a new conflict in the Caribbean discourages foreign direct investment and raises borrowing costs for regional economies. There is also the matter of maritime security, with Venezuela moving light tanks and missile boats to the Atlantic coast near the disputed Guyanese waters. Insurance rates for shipping in the southern Caribbean are under review. The presence of ExxonMobil and other major oil majors in the offshore blocks of Guyana adds another layer of complexity. These are U.S. corporate assets operating in waters that Venezuela now claims are being used as a staging ground for attacks against it. As we look at the current situation on the ground, the Venezuelan National Armed Forces have been placed on high alert. Operation Bolivarian Shield has been activated, resulting in increased troop deployments along the Colombian border and the Atlantic coastline. Intelligence services in Caracas are conducting sweeping raids, which the opposition characterizes as a purge, but which the government maintains are necessary counterterrorism operations to dismantle the remaining cells of the ALLEGED backed plot. The United States Southern Command maintains a surveillance posture, reiterating that its forces are ready to protect U.S. personnel and interests, but emphasizing that its primary goal is diplomatic resolution. We are left witnessing a high-stakes standoff where the margin for error is non-existent. The diplomatic channels that were painstakingly built over the last 2 years have largely been severed. There is no U.S. ambassador in Caracas, and direct lines of communication between the military commands are limited. In this vacuum of dialogue, the risk of miscalculation, a rogue pilot, a border skirmish, or a maritime intercept gone wrong could rapidly spiral from rhetorical accusations into actual engagement. The world is watching to see if the alleged evidence promised by Caracas will be submitted to international bodies for verification, or if these accusations will serve as the justification for a total decoupling from the West. As Venezuela fortifies its coastline and Washington tightens its Economic bees say the Caribbean remains a tinderbox where a single spark could ignite a crisis with repercussions felt from Wall Street to the Amazon. We will continue to track this developing story and provide updates as official reports are released.